Good afternoon, everyone. Let me say it again. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. First of all, I want to acknowledge my intern who has a name. His name is DAngelo Party. He is, I would say, a very helpful and humbling presence in my office. He's my intern, but I won't say too much about him and his background because I'm going to let him say for himself. But I will say, in a nutshell, he is a kid who has both benefited and been harmed by the dependency and delinquency systems. And after, I would say, more than half of his life, most of his life, being system involved and kind of having to navigate that without much life experience or much assistance, he's now doing very well on a pathway to law school. And I'm happy to have him in my office and here to share with you guys today. Okay, well, my name is Frankie Guzman. I am an attorney at the National Center for Youth Law. We are based in Oakland, but we work nationwide to address systemic issues affecting poor youth, especially youth of color, especially those poor youth of color who are additionally affected by disabilities. Primarily, we work in the areas of foster care reform, education reform, mental health care, and juvenile justice reform. I focus on the I work in the juvenile justice department, but I focus specifically on the issue of youth tried as adults. And as you heard earlier from David Steinhardt, it is an issue that affects kids across the country. Here in California, specifically, we have about anywhere from 700 to 900 kids a year, almost 1,000 kids a year being prosecuted as adults. About 600 to 800 of those kids are by prosecutorial discretion. Many of you might have heard the term direct file. Basically, it refers to the policy enacted by Proposition 21, or the law enacted by Proposition 21, that gives prosecutors, DAs, the discretion to pick and choose or decide which kids to prosecute as adults if they've been charged with certain offenses. Traditionally, that decision was given to a judge. After this ballot measure, as with many other ballot initiatives, it changed things dramatically. And so now we have what we have, hundreds of kids a year being prosecuted as adults. The majority, I would say about 3/4 of those cases, are for non-homicide, usually mid to low-level felonies. 85% of these kids approximately are black and brown youth. So said another way, the majority of these cases are affecting black and brown youth for less than serious offenses. And the person who makes that decision is a prosecutor who I would, basically say straightly is a politician, not an expert in adolescent health, behavioral health. I think when you take into consideration what you heard from the young women today, I could, without any reservation, refer to them as the experts. Unfortunately, the experts in many circumstances are not the decision makers. I'm happy that every single one of you is here because to me it suggests that you guys care and are here to learn from the experts and hopefully informs the way that you guys make decisions and the way that you guys exercise your discretion. I am here not so much to talk about juvenile justice or juvenile injustice, specifically with respect to direct file, but on the issue of the school to prison pipeline, also known as school pushout, what I would refer to as this phenomenon where we are undereducating and over-incarcerating youth, again, overwhelmingly youth of color with high needs. And it's not my opinion, it is proven by the statistics. I have my own experience. I was a young person, increasingly, it's a more and more distant memory, but I will say, I grew up in this height of the zero tolerance era. I was born and raised in Ventura County, Southern California. It's a coastal community, largely affluent, conservative community that is, I would, given my experience, categorize as very intolerant of young people with high needs. I grew up in an immigrant community. La Colonia is the name of my community in Oxnard. Growing up, I will say there was very few opportunities for young people. There was a significant amount of drug issues, a significant amount of community violence. Gangs were prevalent. And at an early age, I had to deal with that. My parents were divorced when I was 3. By age 5, my older brother, who was 16, was arrested for committing murder. At age 16, he was prosecuted as an adult. He was found guilty, sentenced to 17 years to life in prison. Today, 30 years later, he's still in prison for that crime he committed when he was 16 years old. He is now 46 years old. I grew up in the wake of that. You know, I often say, you know, I was a little boy from a broken home left to be the man of the house with no idea what the hell I was going to do. And yet I was very much affected. And I was then, as I am now, I would say a very emotional, sensitive person, but those emotions and that sensitivity quickly turned into anger, aggression, and I would say in a lot of ways just being, in a lot of ways turned off by what I saw in my community. Growing up as early as age 10, you know, I really saw how law enforcement in my community, the policing practices changed, where, you know, before I would imagine I was viewed as a threat. You know, I would receive positive kind of interaction with law enforcement. They would stop, talk to me, you know, exchange, give baseball cards or whatever, try to befriend me and my friends. At a certain age, that stopped and it became a much more of an you know, interrogation. Where are you from? Who do you hang with? What's in your pockets? You know, and emptying the backpack. That, for a young kid who doesn't understand, just pissed me off at the time. And so I stopped wanting to even have any interaction with them. Another thing happened. I'm in this community where crack and heroin is rocking my community. Most of the men that I was exposed to were strung out on drugs. And so what I would consider to be our would-be mentors were in effect our antagonizers, and would come down the street and we would see them and we would hide our valuables and you know, like I often reference the Friday movie. I'm like, here comes Debo, you know, and there was more than one Debo in my neighborhood. And so really quickly we learned the art of self-defense, and we're fighting with these guys who are essentially grown men, along with the police, along with the guys across the avenue. It was an environment where I and my friends all pretty much had to be super vigilant, and in some circumstances violent and outwardly aggressive. Fast forward to high school. High schools were not safe in my time. I would say, you know, they're a little better these days, but I would categorize my experience in high school as largely being afraid and disconnected. You know, I initially went to a high school that was, you know, affected by gang violence, and I was jumped early on in high school, so that it affected me so much that I stopped studying. I stopped thinking about what the teacher's saying, because I'm thinking about what's gonna happen when class lets out and I walk in these hallways. Is it gonna happen again? Now, this is not something that young people, I think, openly discuss when they're afraid, and because oftentimes there's no one that you can trust that you feel will understand. That was my experience. I wouldn't go to my lockers after school because I knew if I missed the bus, that's a dangerous position to be in. So really quickly, I went from being a very bright and intelligent student in elementary school and junior high to being a student who was largely failing in my classes. My GPA in high school was a 0.8. First semester of sophomore year, I'm sitting in class. I get pulled out by the student resource officer, commonly known as the campus cop. Takes me to the police station, to the principal's office. Same thing. And he basically begins to tell me that I'm suspected of beating up this kid in the boys' restroom. And I deny this because this kid is actually my friend he was my neighbor, grew up with him my whole life, and especially in the gang context, I have no reason to fight this guy. Well, Gino doesn't believe me, that's his name, and I don't mind saying it, Gino, if you're out there, thank you. He basically handcuffed me, and he says, I was handcuffed to a chair. He says, 2 girls saw you beat up this boy in the boys' restroom. And I'm smart, and I talk back always, and that's always been my thing. He gets frustrated, and I say, you know, how is it that 2 girls saw me do anything in the boys' restroom? They should not be in the boys' restroom. That's like not possible. And he says, I quote, if you don't shut the fuck up and admit that you did this, I'm gonna take you in that room next door and I'm gonna beat your ass. Today, I'd be outraged by the injustice. Then, I was just thinking survival. I believed his threat to be real, and honest, and genuine. And I said, okay, I'm not gonna let this guy do that to me, so I did it. That's what I said. I get suspended for 5 days, go home. Obviously, my mom's very disappointed. I come back a week later to speak with the principal, who explains the philosophy and you know, around zero tolerance, and basically says, if it's true that you didn't do this, you can fight and you will be, out of school for about a month. You can go to the district office and plead your case, and if you win, you'll be reinstated about a month down the line, and you'll have to make up all the work that you missed. Or you can admit that you did this, you'll be expelled, but you'll go to a continuation high school down, in the next city over, where you will go for half a day, 1 day a week. 15-year-old boy responds, "Why didn't you say that sooner? Where do I sign?" I admitted to something I did not do because in my mind, I believed that was the better option for me. I did not want to be in school. And that changed the course of my life because as you've heard, kids that are expelled or suspended have a higher rate of involvement with the juvenile system. 2 weeks after being expelled, I'm in juvenile hall. I robbed a liquor store. I did that. I'm in juvenile hall, and I will say, racism is not over because President Obama is black. The racists will make you believe that. The people who feel it every day can tell you better. So, I'm in juvenile hall for armed robbery. 8 months in juvenile hall. While I'm there, 2 young white girls roll up. They worked at a Little Caesars pizza parlor. They robbed the Domino's pizza with a .45 caliber handgun. They get out after 2 weeks in juvenile hall on probation. I go to court. The judge sentenced me to the maximum available time of 15 years and commits me to the youth authority. My Latino public defender had basically told me, "You're gonna go home, probation's recommending you go home, you have no criminal history, it was my first offense, I had done 8 months, he said, you should go home, time served." The judge wasn't having it, and so when my public defender basically tried to question why it is that he was sentencing me to the maximum available time, the judge told my public defender, "You be quiet and let me sentence this man, or I'm gonna hold you in contempt." To me, that was a very demoralizing experience. One, in my mind, I understood that guy is treating him bad because he's Latino, and secondly, I'm not a man. I'm a kid, I'm a boy, I did something wrong. Yeah, and so in the end, I am committed to the youth authority. At the time, there's 10,000 kids in this system that was designed to hold 6,000 kids. Now, I will say, all the things that David Steinhardt said earlier about how CYA was a terrible place, that's true. But I will also say it wasn't entirely the CYA's fault because every county, every single 58 of the 58 counties had a part to play, a major part to play, because what I understood then, as I understood now, is that the counties were giving up on and punting all of their challenging cases, giving them to the youth authority, who was largely overwhelmed with numbers, high needs, under-resourced, under-trained, and let's be real, some of these people, even with training, maybe don't have the human capacity to deal with these kids. And so the response often was violence. They were beating us up, yes, and if you were being a little jerk, one thing that was popular was called tipping, where they would handcuff you, tilt you forward, and let you go. And you would break a nose, you'd break a cheekbone, you'd lose teeth, but it was something for everybody to learn from, because you knew that would come to you. And let me just say, adults in the room, nobody came to check up on us. Nobody came to see what happened to these kids that we gave up on, that we sent to the youth authority. We were there left to fend for ourselves. And when we talk about, I told that kid, I told him many times, what the hell is telling them going to do for them? Kids if they don't do what we say, they will do what we do. And in our experience, when you're giving up on, what you learn is intolerance. You learn not how to deal with problems, you learn how to just basically not deal with it like you've been dealt with. Go to your room, go to your cell, go to the hole, a jail within a jail. That largely was everyone's experience there. So that when I got out, I will say, I left CYA with PTSD. But at that time, in the mid to late 90s, there was no reentry to speak of. This wasn't this fashionable thing where everybody talks about it and everyone applies for the grants. There was nothing. All I had was a parole officer who would meet me once a month with a bottle to pee in and a threat that if I messed up, I would go back. That was my reentry support and service. I failed miserably, I would say, upon reentry. The first time I got out, I went back within 3 months, spent a year in. I got out again, I failed within 2 months, went back for a year, and then came out. And I say that to say, I didn't come out better, I came out worse, with more issues and less support, I would argue. But Eventually, something began to change, because when I got out the third time, I'm now 21 years old. And I'm starting to think differently. And I didn't notice it then, but I can look back and I can say I thought a lot more about consequences. And I didn't want to be this person that I would interact with at Circle K, this older homie who's always, and it wasn't one person, but in the embodiment of this person, asking for change, panhandling. It always upset me, because I always felt like, why are the older people asking me, who had nothing, for change? You should have something to leave me, us, and that wasn't happening, not in my community. Now I understand, most of the people in my community are just policed to no end, and a lot of the men were either on drugs or in jail, and here I was, no different in a sense, and really wanting something different. So I go to community college. I don't know anyone who's been to college, much less anyone who's graduated outside of corrections officers and my lawyer who defended me. I go there lost, desperate. And I was deeply, I would say, moved and confused at once by my reception there, because at community college, having been through what I had gone through, hundreds of thousands of dollars that the state and the county had invested in keeping me locked up, never helped me. All I got was diagnoses about pathologies. I was made to believe something was wrong with me at every step. Let me just tell you something. They told me I was angry. I talked a lot of mess. I was rebellious. Well, today I'm a lawyer and I'm all of those things. I never changed. What changed was the manner in which I expressed who I am. And so what I always tell people is, we acknowledge this in the LGBT community. We're no longer trying to diagnose and cure them of who they are. Just like that, certain kids are born ornery, angry, talkative, and that's okay, I think. You just need to teach them how to manage, especially young kids and kids of color, because they are vulnerable more than most kids. And that's what I understood then about myself, and in some rebellious way, I just said, I'm going to tuck this away, and one day I'm going to come back stronger than ever, and I'm going to get you guys. People that were harming me. And I always understood school was that way. Because again, I always understood the pen is mightier than the sword. And meanwhile, dozens of my friends are dying every year from drug overdoses and gang violence, shot by the police. I didn't want that. I didn't want the jail. I didn't want the life of drugs. I didn't want the revolving door. I didn't want to die. Die in prison, die in a grave, die with the meaningless, hopeless life. I didn't want that, but I didn't know how to avoid it. I go to school. First time I meet a Latino man in a suit. I didn't meet him, I saw him. And I was having a conversation with somebody, and he's walking by, and this was my response. And I was talking to my counselor, who also was a formerly gang-involved woman with a master's degree, who was now a counselor in the EOP office. She says, that's Joe Ramirez, he's a dean. I go and talk to him, we become friends, he becomes a mentor, and really quickly I get a network. And what I was beginning to say was, this was the first time that I heard these words. What do you want to do with your life? And how can we help you to do that? Hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep me locked up that made me worse. No one asked me that question. No one ever helped me to do what I wanted to do. It was listen to what they're telling me and respond to what they're asking me, which usually was just some BS. I couldn't, So I get good grades. I major in English. I transfer to Berkeley. I graduate. I learn about this thing called public policy. I work for Greenlining Institute for 2 years, mobilizing, organizing, research, advocating on behalf of low-income communities of color on the economic front. But my issue was always social injustice. And so I said, I want to go to law school, but I apply, and I end up being hired by the National Center for Youth Law, where I work now. I worked for John O'Toole, the director. I was his assistant. And I think just being there, being around these people who are so committed and passionate and dedicated to the cause of young people who have no voice. Kids don't vote. Kids don't have any wealth. Kids don't have lobbyists, really. Kids can't emancipate themselves. They just have to deal with whatever we as adults, collective we, do to them. And when they grow up and to be monsters, as we refer to them sometimes, we punish them. But I've never really seen that level of accountability held against the people who do this to kids. And so I saw this happening with the National Center for Youth Law. They were suing. We sued Bill Clinton for his poor foster care system in Arkansas. The year he ran, he settles, invests more in his foster care system, and runs on this campaigner kind of ticket. And he said, I reform my system, because we sued him. And that was fine. We didn't care who gets the credit. We just wanted them to fix it. This is continuing to happen all over the country and yes, in California. So that I go to law school, and in law school, law school, for those of you, the unfortunate souls who had to go through that, law school, and like many other things, kind of educational curriculum, make you believe that that's the only thing going on in life and that's the most important thing. When I was in law school my first semester, by this time I had a younger brother who was adopted informally, the hood way. My mom took him in. He was a troubled kid from down the street who was a family friend of ours. She took him in at age 10 while I was in CYA the last time. At the time I was in CYA, I call home and my mom says, I want to take Junior in. Would you help me help him? I feel like being in the environment he's living in, he's going to grow up to be like you, and I don't want that. I took no offense to that. I understood what that meant, and I said, yeah, Mom, I will help you. I got out, and he was one of those kids that was very traumatized, ADD. He would, sometimes do things he didn't know he was doing, and when you would catch him in the act, he said, well, I didn't do that. Like, I'm looking at you, Junior, but that was fine because I understood his background, and he was one of those kids where if you just hug him, oh, he would hug you so tight, like he'd never been hugged before. Well into his adulthood, when my mom lost her home because of the foreclosure crisis, everyone scattered. My mom moved to Bakersfield. He couldn't come. He ended up being on his own. And he would call me oftentimes drunk, depressed, crying, on the verge of just doing stupid things. And I would say, Junior, I understand you're lonely. I understand you probably feel abandoned again. It's aggravating the original trauma that you felt because when he was taking him to my house, his mom moved to Texas, and to him it seemed like she's having a great life without me. And he often said that to me. And I knew it wasn't true, but that was the way he internalized his experience. So that when my mom left again, after having been raised by her, he felt like, again, I'm abandoned. And he resorted to alcohol. First semester of law school, on Christmas Day, I get a call. He's arrested for murder. He shot the neighbor. He killed the neighbor. He goes to trial. He's found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 50 years to life. He was 21 years old, but to me, he was still a kid. To me, he still hadn't grown up and out of whatever issues he had, and I understood he was really hurting. Hurt people hurt people. And unless we do something that helps them heal, we're only exacerbating the pain. And let me just tell you something about incarceration. Putting traumatized people in a jail cell, difficult, challenging circumstances, they're not going to respond the way rational thinking, untraumatized people will. Jail aggravates the original trauma, and putting traumatized people in challenging situations will make them make poor decisions. And so here I am today. I'm an attorney. I passed the bar. I'm working for a children's rights organization. And the story that I've lived, the story that my older brother lived, and indeed my younger brother lived, continues every day. But what we don't acknowledge is that a lot of these kids in prison, if not, I would say the majority, got their first contact with law enforcement at school. And we always say the greatest indicator of whether a kid is going to go into the prison system is whether or not he has an education. So for me, I will say, early on, when I was not an educated person, when I was trying to find my way, I was angry and I was violent and I was aggressive. But it was because that's how I felt inside. When I felt low, that's how I behaved. I saw people that reminded me of me, and all I wanted to do was punch them in the face. It's self-hate. But when I got educated and I began to develop a positive self-concept and have some self-respect, I stopped being angry at my brethren. Now, I will say, I'm in a position, I think, I mean this honestly and not just to be cute, but I'm a hugging fool. I see people, I'm like, I want to hug, come here, and because I don't feel that anger anymore, and it has everything to do with the way that you're perceived by other people, because I don't think kids really have that level of development where they can just be strong and proud on their own. They are going to respond to what they are getting from other people, and if other people are constantly saying, you're bad, you're a bad kid, you need to behave, if I hit you a lot, I send you to your room a lot, they begin to internalize that. And just like, we did, Castle spoke on today, the young woman young kid who got herself kicked out. That's a lot of kids in school. Kids that couldn't read were always getting kicked out mysteriously at the time when there's the reading to do. Kids that couldn't do math were acting up during math class because you don't want to be exposed as that. You know, and so I just want to like state what has already been said and state the obvious. I think everyone knows kids are not many adults. 6 foot tall, goatee doesn't make you an adult. If you're 16, I mean, even for boys, you're probably 14 or younger, you know, mentally. So I will say, let's just acknowledge that young kids are impulsive. Teenagers sometimes are very difficult to work with. They know it all, you know, but I think it's for us, adults, by virtue of being an adult, but also those of us who took the job to help these kids to do our job. We are doing no one a favor except ourselves when we get rid of them, when we teach them intolerance. So I say we have to hold ourselves to a higher regard. And a lot of us work for bureaucracies that have policies that are intolerant of our young people, and I think each of us has an obligation to basically stand up to change these things that we can. I will say, kids don't learn from jail like adults do. If you lock me up today for doing something wrong, I will learn my lesson. I will immediately be hurt by being in jail because I know what I lost. A kid does not. When I was a kid, I didn't get that message. I just learned to adapt. And I will say, today, our schools, unfortunately, are built like prisons because the same contractors that build prisons build our schools today. But we're also operating our schools like prisons, where kids are being conditioned to be prisoners. I do outreach to high schools across this state, and I see it. Why? Because I've been a prisoner. And so, I've seen it a lot of times. I've been to places where kids are handcuffed at a young age, don't cry, don't do anything. Sometimes they glorify it because they're desensitized. This is state-sponsored violence, people. Let me say it again. This is state-sponsored violence against our kids. And we should never, ever accept what's happening. We should take that like that's our kid, not someone else's kid. Because let me just state another obvious thing. Our kids, your kids, individual people I'm talking to, if your kid messes up, you don't just use the belt on that kid. And I would say maybe a lot of you don't use the belt at all. But it's okay to do that to the other people's kids. And I say belt figuratively speaking. You know, we hug them, we sit them down, we say we're disappointed, we educate them and ask them not to do that again. And if punishment has to be a part of it, well, it's punishment that's conducive to educating the kid. But for some kids, all they get is the belt, so to speak. That's not teaching them to love themselves and to love other people, because when they have a problem, they're going to use the belt against other people. And then we're locking them up again. You know, and I think just in terms of systemic issues, is we have, as a society, largely deferred to law enforcement to do our business. Again, as Castle mentioned earlier, you know, law enforcement has an important role to play, you know, and I think we all respect the role they play in keeping our communities safe. But they're not people that are trained to deal with young kids with high levels of trauma and needs. Let's do that. Let's not call the police when this kid is being a brat, because oftentimes we're responding to kids that we're mad at. We're mad at them, so we're going to call the cops on them. The DA's mad at them, so he's going to prosecute them to the fullest extent. The guards are mad at them, so they lock them down. Everyone's mad at these kids. And when they get mad, what do we do? And so in closing, I just want to state my opinion. We don't have a problem, a criminal or juvenile justice problem. We don't really have, you know, what is it, an education problem. It's a public health issue. It's a public health issue when our kids are not being educated, if they're not being raised right, you know, and we can blame parents all we want, but the fact remains that these kids, these creatures, are alive in our world, and we're not doing anything to help them. Blame who you will, but blame yourself as well if you are in a position to help, and don't. Don't take that job. Go work at Costco. Yeah. I think, you know, just like we learned from Ms. Turner's program, we need more positive adults interacting with our children. Positive interaction, positive engagement, positive activities. And don't give me this, oh, well, we have one program in the city for... You have 100 kids, you need 100 different programs to deal with 100 different personalities. I've heard juvenile court judges diss kids. I was in Alameda County Juvenile Court a year ago. This kid says, I'm on ankle monitor. I'm going to go to a summer camp for the circus arts. Can you remove my ankle bracelet so I'm not stigmatized by this and I don't have a problem interacting with kids? The judge laughs and he says, let's be real here. You're talking about the circus arts. I'm like, what the hell is wrong with this judge? My mom always told me, do something positive that's not illegal, that makes money in an honest way, and I'm good. We don't do that anymore. What's wrong with us? It's a public health issue when we aren't raising healthy kids because of our own unhealth. So, yeah. So, you know, when we talk about school push out, I think it's been said over and over again, but I'm going to say it one last time. We need policies that focus on positive behavior intervention and supports, that put mentors in place of law enforcement, that deal with positive intervention, not coercion and threats. Kids do not respond well to threats of violence. They will admit to things they didn't do. They will take the 2 strikes to go home. You know, it's just like, come on, man. Like, they're not many adults. For those of us who have the discretion to make or break a child, acknowledge your shortcomings. Listen to the experts and defer to the experts where you are not fit to make an educated, compassionate decision. I'm talking about probation. I'm talking about the courts who refuse to listen to the adolescent health experts, teachers, behavioral health people, people who have dedicated their life and their studies to understanding what I think sometimes our jobs won't allow us to really see objectively. I don't think that law enforcement is bad, but again, our training and our experience will guide our decisions in one way that maybe isn't helping young people. Let's ask some questions, because that's what we're asking the kids to do, but we won't do it in our profession. And, you know, I would say, so collaborate with experts. Defer to these experts when you know that you're the decision maker and you don't have all the answers. And lastly, generally speaking, we need our communities, our schools to be nurturing environments, not places where kids are afraid, where kids are abused emotionally, physically, psychologically, because in the end, we're just basically making a generation that will repeat the cycle. Don't expect broken people to behave any differently than how broken people behave. And I know that from a lived experience. And I know that because, you know, I'll segue to DAngelo. DAngelo is one of these people who has had that experience and now can share with us what has and what has not worked for him in his life. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
My name is DAngelo Party. I'm an intern with the National Center for Youth Law, a board member with TASF, and a former foster and probation youth. I would like to share my story with you in the hopes that it can shed light on our system and lead to reforms that will increase the quality and care. Oh, I'm too loud? Sorry. the quality and care for foster youth and probation youth. At age 2, I was taken from my mother when she attempted suicide. I was then placed with my grandparents until the age of 8. When I was reunited with my mother, I was excited to be with my mother again. However, shortly after, I was placed with my alleged father where I was sexually abused. This led to my placement in the foster care system. While in foster care, I was very angry, confused, and completely unsatisfied with my life. It was almost impossible to cope with the conflicting emotions that I carried. As a result, I acted out and was eventually placed on psychotropic meds. Nevertheless, I was never able to receive consistent treatment due to me being bounced around from home to home. At 12 years old, I was crossed over to probation and eventually served 70 years in the juvenile justice system. Looking back on my experiences, I see a kid who was traumatized and angry. I see a kid that needed love and a clean and safe environment. I seen a kid who was internally lonely and empty. Looking forward, I am motivated with a strong desire to see effective changes in policy and practice to improve our system and create opportunities for our youth. We have an opportunity this legislative season to pass Senate Bills 253, 319, 484, and 238, which will address the issues of over-medicating our foster youth. Assembly Bill 854, which will expand educational services for foster youth. These bills will move us in the right direction. I am not the only one. All across our country, there are hundreds of thousands of youth with similar stories. What are we going to do? Simple. Develop policies that are sensitive to our needs and end the perception that the only way to control us is to medicate or cuff us. Let's stand together and improve the outcomes for our youth. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess now we'll entertain some questions if you have any for us.
Could you repeat those
Say them slow. Psychotropic med bills.
Senate Bills 253, 319, 484, and 238, which is our psychotropic package. Assembly Bill 854, which addresses the educational services for foster youth.
Thank you.
Thank you. I work with the juvenile justice system, and I'm happy you mentioned something about pleading out when you haven't done anything wrong.
Right.
Thank you. Now, I'm also glad that you're an attorney, and I'm also glad you have the lived experience. Now, this is my frustration. What do you do, or have you done, or are you doing anything to educate the DAs and the public defendants who actually meet the clients or meet our clients 5 minutes before the hearings, not really knowing what circumstances surrounding whatever the crime they have been charged with, but this is what they say. You know what? You need to just go ahead and plead guilty and serve 45 days in juvenile hall. And because if you decide to fight it, you know, they're going to continue this case and you probably be remanded into juvenile hall until the case is heard. And most of the time, they are remanded into juvenile hall for 90 days or sometimes 120 days before hearing starts.
Sure.
And then what do you do to the parents who are completely oblivious or actually ignorant of what's about to happen to their children when they actually do support or buy into this way of thinking?
All right. Well, I mean, basically her question is, how do we in any way affect the criminal justice system and processes to be more child-centered and focused? And I think that that is a huge problem that we won't correct anytime soon, which is why I think largely the advocates suggest do not prosecute kids, deal with it outside in an informal setting, because once the case comes to the DA, I promise you, the DA is not going to consider or appreciate what it is that you appreciate and consider in dealing with young people. DAs overwhelmingly have an objective that involves successful prosecutions. If you look on a DA's website, they boast about their conviction rates, 92, 98%. A lot of these convictions are plea bargained out. I will tell you, for especially with the kids that I work on, which is direct filed youth, when you charge a young kid as an adult, let's take a 14-year-old kid with developmental disabilities, functions at an 8-year-old level. I get these calls a lot. Mom calls and says, Frankie, public defender will not answer my calls. The DA is charging my kid with outrageous list of felonies, facing 80 years, and no one died. And it's sad, because the way it works is once you prosecute a kid as an adult, that kid is now an adult, and you've severed parental ties. It's a legal fiction that they're an adult. So now that kid, one, is faced with a very serious decision to make that will affect the rest of his life. Even if that kid gets out, he will probably have pled to some strikes. But two, he doesn't have the benefit of his parent, who has probably been the one person who's looking out for him, because the parent is not involved in an adult criminal case. A juvenile defendant will have the benefit of consultation with the parents. And so, and three, I mean, let's be honest, oftentimes, I would say public defenders are very smart, very capable, very experienced people, but oftentimes they are overwhelmed with high numbers of caseloads and very little resources. The best public defender's offices have social workers on staff that work with them and help them deal with the social work needs of their criminal defendants. Oftentimes these services will help mitigate the consequences, and the DA will say, if you put them in this program and do these things, then I'll go lower. But if that's not happening, then DAs are just going to say, tough, this kid's going away. And people blame the public defender, because I'll tell you, I know public defenders that sometimes will avoid the mom who's super engaged, super involved, and just be like, I don't want to talk to her because she expects me to work and I can't work on this case. I have other cases that they feel are probably they can win, or whatever the case. So what you describe is a complicated system that I think is not an appropriate place to deal with young people who have kids, and that is why what we are suggesting here. I think that the conversation is, at all costs, keep kids out of the juvenile and criminal justice systems, because it's not an appropriate place for a kid who has mental health issues, developmental health issues, and trauma. Use the system for kids that are a threat to other people, to themselves, and that's it. These drug courts, like sometimes drug courts are well-intentioned, but the best drug courts don't rely on jail, they rely on services. In Ventura County, I hear about it all the time. Kids are locked up for 30-day dryouts for giving a dirty for weed. 30-day tryout for weed. Like if the kid is smoking weed, I often tell parents, choose your battles. I don't know, there are bigger problems because I'm maybe desensitized to it, but deal with the underlying need. When I smoked weed, it was because I was depressed. I was not an addict. I didn't need AA. I needed something positive in my life to help change my life outlook, and that didn't come, and jail didn't help it. So, I'm sorry I don't have an answer for you except to say that's the way it is. Unless we have some serious criminal justice reform in this country, it's going to continue to be a terrible place for children, and we should not do that to them at all.
I have a question. What is your take on behavioral health court?
My take again on these specialty courts is good and bad, right? Again, I think that the best. I appreciate that we have courts that are narrowed and tailored to the specific needs of a certain need, but not when it's a public health need that can be dealt with in other ways, and instead is being used to incarcerate more people. I often see these drug courts or behavioral health courts as expanding the net. We're just pulling in more people because our intentions are good and we think somehow the court is going to help. But all intervention is not good intervention. And so if you have judges who are not really understanding that the deep-rooted issue is not one of a bad decision, it's really one of just kind of like an emotional or behavioral unhealth, then we need to address that, but not use a cage, because a cage will help deteriorate that kid further. And so to answer your question, I think behavioral health courts have the potential to do good, but we need to rely on community-based services, using the court's authority, and not using the jail to in any way coerce positive behavior, because you don't just think of positive behavior, you have to be educated, and it takes time.
True. That's true.
And it takes work.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I don't really think I need the mic. I just want to say, you guys are fire. Fire, for real. And we have similar backgrounds. I actually now facilitate at the juvenile correctional facility I was housed at when I was 15 and 16. And a couple of the guys that I worked with are about to come home soon, and they want to go back to regular school. How do I advocate for them to go back to regular school?
Well, I think what needs to happen is have between the Department of Education and Probation have a unified kind of collaborative approach to help direct kids back in. I know that there are certain jurisdictions like Alameda County that actually have a transition center in the juvenile hall that kind of help them transition out, and that is again a collaborative project between legal aid, like Bay Area Legal Aid, the probation department, and the Department of Education. And it takes everybody to agree that this is what needs to happen and allocate the resources to it, because it doesn't just come from a person with a great idea. It takes, again, the commitment of the people with the discretion, because you can either make or you can break a good idea just by having the power to say no. And if you say yes, again, I'm going to tell you this. I think the best programs are the ones that also include people like you, that are authentic, credible voices. If you put, let's take the case of, so many jurisdictions around the state where you pay law enforcement people to come in and sell their ideas, and kids are just turned off to it because you're asking them to do things that they're not ready to do or don't trust you, it's going to fail. Help comes in many forms, and I think the people that are formerly incarcerated, formerly gang involved, probably understand very well, but they're not allowed to. When I was in Ventura County, I was interested in coaching Little League. I wanted to be more involved and help young kids. I was not allowed because I had felonies. I don't understand what makes me less qualified than the person that they did put, who can't really motivate these kids like I know I could. And so, aside from the commitment and the money and the resources, I think we also have to staff it in such a way that, put people who have been formerly incarcerated, that now have educations in these positions, because you can't expect kids to buy into this idea of education when they don't know what it's good for. They don't know anybody who's ever gone to school. When I was in school, I didn't care about English because to me it was white studies. There ain't any white people in my community, so why do I care about the Puritans? I didn't. I ultimately became a man, went to college, and my BA that I got from UC Berkeley was in English, the #1 English department in the country. So I think it's a matter of growth, maturity, but it's also who's feeding you this idea and encouraging you to do this. Is it someone that I despise and distrust, who has harmed me in the past? Or is it somebody that I love, admire, and respect, who maybe, I'll tell you this, I didn't believe in myself until people that I respected believed in me, and I borrowed their confidence in me until I had some of my own.
I don't need it, I'm okay.
Okay.
So I need to ask a delicate question, especially because of some of the players in the room. But I work primarily with the young ladies that are in our juvenile hall. And some of them are brought there for status offenses. They don't get along with mom, and mom has kicked them out, and it's 2 months later, and they're still in juvenile hall, and they just clearly don't belong there. And we're having these hearts to heart, and they're pouring out some of this re-traumatization that they're going through. How can I start that conversation of creating something different, healthier alternatives than incarceration?
Well, I think one thing that we need to really invest in, which we don't have a whole lot of, and so people probably think it's a very foreign or undoable thing, is having more shelters or safe spaces for kids in the community. Why is it if a cop picks up a kid on the street, takes them to juvenile hall, why can't you take them to a home where there's a positive adult that isn't there to jail them? It's not a healthy place. I think once I went to juvenile hall, I felt like the worst had happened to me. What can you do to me now? Mm-hmm. I didn't care anymore. And I think if I had a safe place to go, or around people that I thought, even if everybody that worked in the juvenile hall was a pediatrician, a child, kind of development expert, the environment is not healthy. And so I envision a place where, we didn't use our billions of dollars to build new juvenile halls. We used them to build community centers, day reporting centers, boys and girls clubs that were actually for us, by us, right? Not this sterile place where I'm just like, I don't want to be here because this place is scary to me still. And having the activities, having that true investment in these communities. And I think largely our culture has moved away from that, and we've moved into these, kind of jailing everybody with a mental health problem, a developmental problem, or just don't have healthy parent problems. So I think the investments need to be kind of developed or invested. We need to invest in infrastructure, we need to invest in programming, we need to invest in staffing. And again, allow the community to help. Allow everyone to help. People like me, people like him, people like everyone in this room, because it's not just some of us who with clean records that are able to help. Some of us without clean records can help, and in my opinion, sometimes more effectively. We don't have environments like safe spaces for kids. Let's say I'm a kid and I'm growing up and I have a phase where I'm a gang member. Why can't that be respected and allow me to age out of it? Why do I have to be on a gang registry, then have gang terms, then go to jail? In a lot of ways, it just solidifies your gang ties, because you go to jail. I always thought it was the most ironic thing. I would be violated for hanging around gang members, sent to CYA with gang members.
Defeats the purpose.
Right. And so, I just don't get it. I think, again, our response, because of our own inadequacy, our own inability to really address the issue in a sensible way, I think it's culture, I think it's resources, it's priorities. We largely depend on jails, but shouldn't. I think we need to invest in community services. What's wrong with having a shelter for kids where you can drop them off and have people check up on them who love them and they're safe? You don't need to put barbed wire on it. You don't need to put a person with a gun at the door. I mean, I'm sure other countries do it, but we don't, because I think, you know, this has been our history. In the back.
When you said what's wrong with us, I took a moment and was like, nothing's wrong with us. Honestly, it's not what's wrong with us, it's what's wrong with the others who don't want to see the change happen. You know, people who are scared and afraid to lose what they believe is right. But what about us? What happened to what we believe in? So when those thoughts were running through your head, I'm pretty sure you should have thought of, it's not me. It's what they believe, not what I believe. And I give you, and DAngelo, sorry, I forgot your name for a little bit. I give you guys a lot of props. I mean, you guys don't, my mom always told me not to judge a book by its cover, but I did. You know, I would have never thought of you guys going through some stuff like, I say this because kids from the ghetto. I wouldn't have thought you guys would have gone through it. And you know what? It's not right that I did that, but I'm proud of you guys for, you know, using that and then being as successful as you guys are now. I give you guys the biggest round of applause.
All right.
Okay, I'll stand up. You guys don't have to look down at me. Okay, I didn't have a question, I just had a comment. I just want to say thank you for you guys coming on, telling your personal stories, and it relates to some people, mainly me in particular. And I relate to what you guys are saying. I understand coming from my brother's background. He's like in and out of jail a lot, and he's trying to work on it now, so I'm really proud of him. And so it kind of reminds me of you a little bit, and then my brother was just trying to, and he's pretty smart too. But anyways, I just want to say thank you for sharing your story and telling us all about yourself.
Thank you.
I just want to kind of share, we talked about a lot of the disparities that's happening within our systems, but I kind of want to take a second and share with you some of the things I'm very proud of that's happening within our county and within our community. The director of our Human Services Agency, Anna Pagan, very innovative and forward thinker, collaborated with the chief of probation, two super agencies that traditionally would never ever work together. Okay, and the purpose was for two things. One, to duplicate a program that we were offering within the Human Services Agency called Leadership for Life, which offered a series of 10 workshops to men, specifically fathers, on how to navigate the various systems of our community, how to communicate within those systems, and then how to advocate for themselves and their children. Well, we duplicated it and modified it to serve the AB 109 population that was coming out. And so that's working very well. The model that we use is you got to walk the walk before you can talk the talk. So what she has done is we have hired former felons, we call them fine friendly felons, who have walked that walk to facilitate our workshop. We have some that are here today and we have some that are in Merced doing the work as well. But these gentlemen are also doing the work in the juvenile hall, working with youth there. They walk the walk. They talk the talk. When they go in there and work with these youth, they're sitting across the table from themselves at 16 years old, from themselves at 15 years old. And so the next process we're working on now, and our curriculum writer is right here as well, Nora Gerber, who was very instrumental. She's an educator, and thank you. Yes, please, you're a round of applause. So it's a very unique collaboration that didn't exist before we got here. Heidi Zakala is also here, who's a program manager with probation, passionate about youth. And not only am I working through the Human Services Agency as a program coordinator for All Dads Matter, but I'm also the chair of the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Commission in our county. So we bring that experience to the table, okay? Kelly Turner is working with us as well to co-facilitate some different workshops with these gentlemen. So there's a model that's taking place there that's compassion-driven, that's outcomes-driven. Our next phase is we're working diligently to put together an aftercare program so that we can have a transition for our youth who do so well in the juvenile hall because it's a healthy, safe environment. The lights are on all the time, the meals are on time, they're safe, they get some kind of medical care. But when they get out, what happens then? You know, that drop off at the corner philosophy is just not working. So there are some things that are working within our county that are duplicatable if you have the right leadership within your community that's committed and dedicated and willing to take some heat for our youth. So there's a lot of work that can be done. Merced County.
Do you have any strategy?
Well, to be completely honest with you, the number one strategy is the leadership. We're very fortunate and blessed to have a director like Anna Pagan that said, you know what, and a director and a chief like Scott Ball, who said, you know what, we're going against the norm. Pardon me? Yes, Scott Ball, yeah, from Stanislaus County. That said, you know what, we throwing good money after bad. We're sick of kids coming in here and in an unhealthy environment and then leaving here and doing worse. The JIOs were saying, there's kids in here that spent more Christmases with me than they spent with their own family. What can we do to try to change that? Program managers like Heidi and Joe Frontello and Lori Miner, and JIOs who come to the table and said, you know what, I'm not happy with the way things are working. Not only are they doing these innovative programs, but also a nonprofit, community-based organizations called Sacred Rock, with a nationally acclaimed rock climber comes into the facilities, pick youth up in the facility and take them to Yosemite for the day. Okay, they're doing work out of Yosemite on trails, they're swimming, guys in different gangs who ordinarily would never have anything in common, turn into just 4 15-year-old kids swimming in rivers. You know, and we see that happen all the time within our community. But it's that leadership that says status quo is not working. It's not working. We got to do something different. And took the initiative to make that happen. So the strategy has to come from leadership. And also, lastly, people, your priorities are reflected in your budget. You know what I'm saying? It's easy to say we care about kids and concern, but if the bottom line don't show it, it's just rhetoric. So, thank you.
Is there any more questions for Frankie and DAngelo?
Like real questions. Well, I just wanted to give him the opportunity to say closing. Thank you.
So I just want to appreciate everyone for coming, for listening. We hope that I can see you, at the state capitol at one of these legislative committee hearings or subcommittee hearings. Giving I support this bill and this is my organization, or as a private individual. Currently, SB 124, which I didn't mention, which ends or defines solitary confinement and restricts its use, is suspended in the Appropriations Committee. So any kind of support around that will be great. AB 853 is also in appropriations, and then our package of psychotropic medication bills is also in appropriations. So now is the time to really stand up, get involved, write letters to the different senators, assembly members, and kind of just form a coalition around this. So with that said, I appreciate your time, I appreciate your support, and I look forward to working with you guys in the future. Thank you.